Mr. Matt here with your Sunday school lesson for today. Now we're starting a new series, and this one is going to be about a man named David who would become the greatest king of all of Israel. But for our time together, we're going to focus on stories about David when he was young, when he was a boy, maybe an early teenager, and 3 stories that we learn about David and what they can tell to us. Now, since this is our first time, we'll just talk a little bit about all 3 of those stories just so you can know what we're going to be getting into. And then in the weeks ahead, we'll take a closer look at each one of those stories separately. So when we meet David in the Bible, he is a shepherd. He is a shepherd watching the flocks of his father Jesse. And he's very young, but even though he's young, these stories that we hear, they tell us so much that maybe we can learn from too. Now, the 3 stories are first about David being anointed to become king. Second, about David's gift with the lyre and how he used it. And then third, probably the most famous story of young David, is the story of David when he battled the giant Goliath. So, let me give you a little bit about each of those stories. The first story is about David being anointed to become the king. Now, anointed just means a small ceremony in which oil was poured over the head of someone to prepare them for something that was going to happen. And in this story, Samuel is sent by God to go and find the new king, or the person that's going to become the new king, and anoint them. Now, there was already a king, and his name was King Saul. And while early in his life, Saul listened to God, as he became king, he forgot about listening to God and following God's direction. And so God had decided that there would need to be a new king because King Saul had lost his way. So Samuel goes out and he's sent to Jesse's house because God tells him that one of the sons of Jesse is going to be the new king. Now, Jesse had many sons. All of them were older than David, and all of them were stronger and bigger and taller and maybe had better leadership skills. We don't really know. We don't hear a whole lot about that. So when Samuel gets there, he looks at these young men and he's like, well, surely this strong young man, he must be going to be the next king. But as he's doing that, God is talking to Samuel and saying, no, that is not the person. You are looking at what's on the outside. You must look at what is on the inside to see who the king should be. Now, while Samuel is visiting with Jesse and David's older brothers, David is still out with the sheep. And Samuel asks Jesse, do you have any other sons? And he says, well, there's young David, but he's out with the sheep. And Samuel says, I will wait until he comes. And when David shows up, Samuel sees him. And God says, yes, this is the one. This is the one who has a heart for me, has a heart for God. And because he has a heart for God, even though he's young and even though there's still another king, Samuel anoints him with oil, and David is going to become the king someday because he has a heart for God and because God wants to use that heart to lead his people. So that's sort of the first story about David. The second story about David is about his talent. We hear that David is very talented playing an instrument called a lyre. And he probably also sings to go along with that. And he's very gifted and he plays extremely well. Now, King Saul, who has turned away from God, is from time to time gets these terrible headaches and he's tormented by these dark thoughts. And one of the people working in the palace for the king says, we need to find something that can soothe the king. And someone says, I know, there's a shepherd boy named David, and he plays the lyre beautifully. Perhaps he can come and play for the king and help the king. So David is called for, and he goes, and he does play for the king. And he uses his gift with the lyre and with song, and as he's playing, King Saul is able to relax, and his thoughts clear up, and his headache goes away, and he's able to rest. The interesting thing in this story is how David uses his gift to help other people. Now, the third story of David is one you might already know. And it's a story of how the army of Israel was faced off against the army of the Philistines. And the Philistine army had a champion who was a giant of a man named Goliath. And the two armies are sort of looking across the field at one another, and Goliath is taunting Israel and is making fun of them, and is even making fun of God, because he says, if your God was so strong, you wouldn't be afraid to come and challenge us. Now, David was visiting his brothers who were in the army, and he had brought them some food and things, and he hears Goliath making fun of God and making fun of Israel. And he looks and he sees that no one is going to stand up to Goliath. They're all afraid. And David says, no, I will stand up to Goliath. No one gets to make fun of God. No one gets to make fun of my Lord. And so David goes out and he picks up a few rocks with his sling, and he goes and he stands before Goliath, who just laughs and says, who are you? Are you some sort of dog that they're sending out to me? You don't have any armor. You're just a boy. How do you intend to stand up to me? And David says, I'm not standing up to you, but God is with me, and God is going to help me, and God is going to deliver us. And Goliath laughs, and he starts to come for David, and David puts the rock into his sling, and he whips it around, and he lets it fly, and it smacks Goliath in the head, and Goliath falls. And David, just because of his faith in God and his belief that God was going to be with him, stands up to this giant, and stands up where no one else will, and says, no, this is the right thing. This is what I must do. And so we get the lesson there of having such courage and such belief in what God does that we're able to face any obstacle that life puts before us. So those are the quick summary of the 3 stories about David that we're going to focus on this month. They're very interesting, but again, they tell us something that we should know about having a heart for God, about using our gifts for God, and about standing firm in our faith and having courage in God. So it's going to be a fun month full of some great stories. For today, your activity video is going to come up. It's a game station. I hope you like it. It's simple but fun, and it can be fun to do with your family. So I hope you'll jump to the next video and see what's in store for today. That's all we have time for now. Until next time, bye.